This is part 1 of my analysis of 1,000 Years of Good Prayers by the Chinese-born writer Yiyun Li. It first appeared in the literary magazine Salamander and was then published as part of Li's debut collection of short stories in 2005. It was made into a film in 2007. It tells the story of retired rocket scientist Mr. Shei, an elderly Chinese widower who has come to visit his newly divorced daughter in the American Midwestern town where she has moved from China. Every day while she is at her job in a college library, he goes to the park and sits alongside Madam, an elderly Iranian lady who fled Iran after the revolution in her country, and with whom he has struck up a friendship, even though they both know little English. The pair sit and talk in a mixture of broken English, Chinese and Persian, seemingly connecting through their fragmented conversations on a purely emotional level. Mr. Shei is anxious to help his daughter recover from her divorce, cooking for her every evening and trying to engage her in conversation about her life. But she eats little and he finds her uncommunicative and distant. His inherited world of Chinese history and tradition not connecting with her own adopted modern American way of life. After meals, she either goes to her room and shuts the door or goes out and comes home late. The tension between Mr. Shei and his daughter continues to build as he challenges her about her reticence and her unwillingness to let him into her life. It comes to a head one night when she decides that enough is enough and that she will tell him not only the truth about the breakdown of her relationship with her husband, but also that she knows the truth about his own relationship with her mother, the fact that he wasn't a rocket scientist after all, and how this has all impacted on her ability to connect with him and with her own language now. Rather than address the issue, Mr. Shei accepts her position and agrees that, after his tour of America that she is arranging for him, he will return directly to China without seeing her again. The story ends with Mr. Shei sitting in the park as he sees Madam for the last time. It's only now that he feels able to be honest with himself about what actually happened all those years ago that prevented him from continuing in the job he loved. He reveals that the only person he was able to talk to about his highly confidential work was a female computer programmer called Yiyun Li, which led to an intimacy between them that transcended physical love. When the authorities found out, he was given the option of publicly admitting to the affair and keeping his job, or not admitting it and being demoted to the position of a lowly office worker. Adamant that he had done nothing wrong because there had been no physical contact between them, he chose to be demoted, and, due to the confidential nature of his job, he kept up the pretense over the years that he was still a rocket scientist. Although there is no reconciliation between Mr. Shei and his daughter at the end, he is able at least to return to China, reconciled to a version of his past that he is able to live with. 1,000 Years of Good Prayers is a very sad story, focusing primarily on the linguistic, cultural and emotional barriers that lead to intergenerational conflict and fractured relationships. Li utilises a third-person narrator with limited omniscience to tell her story. In other words, the third-person narration is focused through the eyes of a single character, Mr. Shei. In seeing everything from Mr. Shei's perspective, the reader is able to accompany him on his journey of introspection and self-discovery, as he finally admits, if only to himself and an uncomprehending Madam, that he is not a retired rocket scientist after all, and that he did cheat, emotionally if not physically, on his wife with a woman from work. Note how the only character, apart from Mr. Shei, to be given their own name is Yiyun Li, the young woman with whom he was accused of having an affair. The way in which Mr. Shei's daughter is referred to only as his daughter throughout indicates the lack of emotional warmth between them, and the way in which her identity is reduced to her role and status within the family, thus dictating the way in which they relate to one another. Li presents the Chinese language and the way it has been constrained by its history and cultural environment as one that does not facilitate communication on any meaningful level. Not only are there unspoken rules about the way young and old, male and female, are expected to talk to one another, but Mr. Xi's daughter's early life also coincides with the Cultural Revolution, which took place in China under the communist leader Mao Zedong. During this period, language and communication were heavily manipulated and controlled to serve the political goals of the Chinese Communist Party. Mr. Xi and his daughter both speak the same language, but they can't communicate in an authentic way while using it. The girl's curiosity and desire to connect when she was very young was stifled by her parents' inability to communicate, not only with her, but with one another. As a consequence, Mr. Xi's daughter feels that speaking Chinese restrains her, and she only seems to come alive and communicative when she is speaking English and is able to be her authentic self. Paradoxically, Mr. Xi can only begin to come close to being his own authentic self when he faces the truth and admits, effectively to himself, that his identity of a retired rocket scientist is a sham, when speaking Chinese to an Iranian lady who does not understand him. For a truly fulfilling relationship, it seems that words and emotions need to work together. On their own, they're not enough. In the story, Li explores how identity and the way in which we see ourselves and others in the world are deeply ingrained within the language that we use, and how this leads to conflicts when traditional ways of communicating are set against those that are more modern. The language we speak defines our identity, and while English gives Xi's daughter the freedom to express herself and to forge a new identity, one that is perhaps more in tune with her authentic self, it also, for a short time at least, allows Mr. Xi, ironically, to forge an inauthentic identity as a new person, a rocket scientist, a good conversationalist, a loving father, a happy man. As we come to find out, Mr. Xi has not really been any of these things. The title, 1,000 Years of Good Prayers, is a reference to Mr. Xi's desire for a good relationship with his daughter, which is, ultimately, unfulfilled. The Chinese idiom he quotes emphasizes the deep connection between people that describes a profound and fated relationship, such as a strong friendship or a marriage. It suggests that such significant relationships are the result of many lifetimes of effort and virtue. For Mr. Xi, 3,000 years of good prayers are necessary for a strong marriage. For a reconciliation and mutual understanding with a daughter, 1,000. The story opens with the establishment of Mr. Xi's identity. A rocket scientist, Mr. Xi tells people when they ask about his profession in China. Once he's learnt the phrase, he likes to repeat it because of the impressed reaction that this identity gets for him as he finds the people he meets in America friendly and open. So much so that he has already made quite a few acquaintances in the park which he visits on a daily basis. He has made one friend in particular, a slightly older Iranian lady. Despite the fact they both speak little English, they have no problem understanding each other, and in no time they become friends. Li establishes early on the importance that language, communication and identity will have in this story. Even though they sometimes run out of English, Madam just carries on in Persian, and although he does not understand much of what she is saying, he feels her joy in talking to him, the same joy he feels listening to her. Mr. Xi's connection with Madam makes him want to relate to her on a more personal level and tell her that he misses the days when his daughter was small and life was hopeful. But he is sure, even before he starts, that his English would fail him. Besides, it is never his habit to talk about the past. This is our first indication that not everything in Mr. Xi's life is going well, despite the fact that he professes to feel happier at this moment than he remembers he ever did in his life. There's obviously something not quite right in his relationship with his daughter, and there is a suggestion that revisiting his past will be like opening Pandora's box. Mr. Shei cooks dinner for his daughter every evening, but we sense the feeling of disconnect between the two right from the start. Even though she is polite and respectful towards him, complimenting his cooking, she is not inclined to engage in conversation with him on any meaningful level. His daughter does not reply. Despite the pride he takes in his cooking and her praises for it, she eats little and eats out of duty. Note how Mr. Shei's very traditional upbringing means that he has a very fixed view on marriage and gender roles. Even though he doesn't have the details about his daughter's marriage, he is convinced that it failed because of something her husband did. Mr. Shei does not know what led the boat of their marriage to run into a hidden rock, but whatever the reason is, it must not be her fault. She is made for a good wife, soft-voiced and kind-hearted, dutiful and beautiful, a younger version of her mother. In fact, Mr. Shei is so convinced that his daughter is suffering that he has persuaded her to let him come to America for an extended visit so that he can help her recover. He is so glad that he has come because America makes him a new person, a rocket scientist, a good conversationalist, a loving father, a happy man. Mr. Shei's daughter, however, doesn't seem quite so happy to have him there, as she doesn't actively seek his companionship. Rather, she seems to avoid it. After dinner, Mr. Shei's daughter either retreats to her bedroom to read or drives away and comes home at late hours. Seeing himself as the solution to her apparent sadness and uncommunicativeness, rather than the cause, Mr. Shei starts to talk more to tackle her solitude, asking questions about the part of her life he is not witnessing. "How was her work of the day?" he asks. "Fine," she says tiredly. His questions, however, move on from her present life to her plans for the future, and become more interrogating and hectoring. Once more we are made aware of his own very traditional views, that women in their marriageable 20s and early 30s are like lychees that have been picked from the tree. Each passing day makes them less fresh and less desirable, and only too soon will they lose their value and have to be gotten rid of at a sale price. Note the use of a simile involving a Chinese fruit that underlines Mr. Shei's traditional perspective on the inherent sweetness and passivity of the female as a commodity in his culture. Mr. Shei's manner, however, only seems to alienate his daughter. The more he talks, the more he is moved by his own patience. His daughter, however, does not improve. She eats less and becomes quieter each day. When Mr. Shei challenges her that her quietness must equate to unhappiness, she doesn't shy away from challenging him back. "Baba, you used to be very quiet, remember? Were you unhappy then?" Note the intergenerational conflict here, as Mr. Shei, not prepared for such directness from his daughter, is unable to reply. It is evident from this that it is culturally inappropriate for a Chinese daughter to be so confrontational with her parent. Mr. Shei's daughter does not back down, though, and the direct gaze that she fixes on him reminds him of her mother too. At one time in their marriage, she gazed at him with this questioning look, waiting for an answer he did not have for her. It would appear that this is not the first time that communication problems have beset the family, and that his own marriage suffered from the inability to open up. Mr. Shei's daughter remains undaunted, refusing to be fobbed off that it was the confidential nature of his work as a rocket scientist that means he spoke little. "You didn't talk much about anything," his daughter says. When Mr. Shei counters that, "I talk more now, I'm improving, no?" the way in which she answers with the single word, "Sure," suggests that for her at least it's too little too late, and at Mr. Shei's urging that that's what you need to do, talk more, she appears less enthusiastic and cuts the conversation off. The next day, Mr. Shei tries to confide in Madam that he is worried that his daughter is not happy because of her divorce, but he is unsure that she has understood what he has said. Nevertheless, he appreciates that Madam and he, from different worlds and with different languages, have this opportunity to sit and talk in the autumn sunshine. Gaining in confidence, Mr. Shei begins to talk to Madam in Chinese, explaining an idiom that translates as, "It takes 300 years of prayers to have the chance to cross a river with someone in the same boat." He goes on to explain that there's a reason for every relationship. That's what the saying means. Husband and wife, parents and children, friends and enemies, strangers you bump into in the street. It takes 3,000 years of prayers to place your head side by side with your loved ones on the pillow. Father and daughter? 1,000 years maybe. In other words, it takes a lot of time, effort and goodwill for a father and daughter to have a good relationship. Note how even in Chinese, when there is no possibility of Madam truly understanding what he is saying, he cannot admit the truth even to himself, as he persists in justifying his conduct. She doesn't understand that I didn't talk much with her mother and her because I was a rocket scientist back then. Everything was confidential. We were trained not to talk. The irony is not lost on him that he's travelled a great distance in order to build bridges with his daughter, only to find a stronger emotional connection and empathy with a stranger who doesn't understand his language. Imagine he's travelled half a world to his daughter to make up for the talks he denied her when she was younger, but only to find her uninterested in his words. Imagine Madam, a stranger who does not even know his language, listens to him with more understanding. He does, however, concede that some of the blame must lie at his door, but note that he is still unable to confront the root of the problem. Of course, there's a reason for a bad relationship too. I must be praying half-heartedly for 1,000 years for the daughter. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.